So hello everyone, last time we saw that what was the Docker, why Docker was used, and some of the properties of Docker for a very initial video. Now we are going to see that how Docker architecture works, what is client, what is Docker daemon. So here Docker is made of client server architecture, where client and server are there. So client basically requests for something and server process it and get back with the response. That's a basic client server architecture. There are other architecture as well, like P2P, which is peer to peer architecture, where both client and server are state on the single node or a single server and communicate with each other. Plus, it is used for torrents basically, and we have seen P2P in most of the torrents website. Then there's a microservice architecture where single monolith application is divided into small chunks of services. So there will be a single monolith and 4 services, for example, and the client when requests and all the requests goes to all the microservices and get the response back to the client. That's how microservice works. Then another example is serverless event driven architecture, where servers are basically managed by cloud providers. They are not actually serverless. Then whatever request goes from the client, it goes to the server. It boots up the servers and it process it and get back to the client. Now we are going to see that what are the parts of Docker architecture. So there is a client, there is a Docker host, and the Docker registry. So basically in client, Docker CLI, which you install on your PC, the command line which we use for Docker, and where you can run Docker run, pull, or build. So that's basically Docker client, which requests to the Docker host. So majority part of Docker host is Docker daemon. Daemon means the background process. So when the client requests to the Docker host, it goes to the Docker daemon. Docker daemon basically runs in the background. It takes the request and process it. For example, if you took the Docker pull, then it checks into the local, that is the image is available into local or not. If it is not available, then it goes to the Docker registry and checks that is that image is available or not. If the image is available, it gets back to the Docker daemon, and Docker daemon gives back to the Docker client. That's how basically all the process goes. Now we are going to see that what is Docker desktop. So basically for the specifically for the Windows, when we download the Docker desktop, the GUI version in contains the Docker client, which is Docker CLI plus Docker daemon. So here on the local server, it contains both of them, Docker CLI and Docker D, which also called as a Docker daemon. So Docker D can be installed over your PC. Also, it can be situated as a remote as well. So Docker D can be remote and even configure via config file, which we needs to add to Docker D. This can be seen into the part of hands-on. Then Docker D can be on a multiple server as well. So a single client can request to the multiple daemons like D1, D2, and D3. And also a Docker Compose is part of Docker client. If you want to see that what is Docker Compose, so let's see what is Docker Compose. So Docker Compose is basically set of Docker files. Okay, so you do not need to carry individual Docker images and run it individually. So basically, let's assume that you have Nginx Docker image and PSQL, PostgreSQL Docker image. You take them, you put it into a file called Docker Compose, okay, and set some of the instruction, and you are able to run that Docker Compose file, and with Docker Compose up, and it will be up. So it will be very handy when you are using multiple images and connection between them. Now we are going to see that under the hood how the request flows between the architecture. So when they run the Docker CLI, it goes to Docker D, it processes it, but under the hood container D is used. So container D is it's basically useful for the life cycle of container, how it works. It handles all the how to create Docker file, delete it, or etc. In that Docker D, it calls to the run C. Run C is basically framework with direct contact with OS, and it handles how container is going to work over the guest OS. So it connects with the OS and kernel and helps to deploy container, basically guest OS, or guest OS over the host OS. Yeah. So this is the flow. Docker CLI goes to the Docker D. Docker D goes to the container D. Basically, container D is used in Kubernetes also. There is no Docker D. Then Docker D goes to run C, and run C creates Docker for us.